How's it going, you guys? So in this video, I'm going to be breaking down some of the science behind rhodiola, and in particular, the mechanisms of action, or what we know about the mechanisms of action of rosavins and salidisaride. Okay, I probably didn't say that properly. But just as a short version, so you guys can walk away with some practical knowledge, there's a lot of evidence as to the varying effects of these active constituents, or what we believe is the active constituents of rhodiola, none of which is conclusive. We have a lot of molecular knowledge on these compounds, but we're not exactly sure what is exerting the overall psychopharmacological effects of rhodiola. For example, it's well known that rhodiola is an effective fatigue-reducing agent, particularly in lower dosages. Many studies show higher dosages of rhodiola can actually induce fatigue, and there is a Bell response curve, in that more is not always better. Rhodiola exerts neuroprotective effects. It helps to reduce cortisol and potentially offset glutamate. All of these seem to be what is contributing towards its anti-stress effects. Although, keep in mind, reducing cortisol and offsetting glutamate can also cause fatigue and tiredness if done to too high of an extent. So the other thing is that rhodiola tends to reduce stress-induced binge eating in female rats. Now, rhodiola appears to be highly serotoninogenic, so it increases serotonin to a large degree, and it reduces corticosteroids. Okay, it seems to have an overall catecholamine reducing effect, despite some people claiming that it increases dopamine. The thing is, its inhibition of monoamine oxidases seems to be irrelevant. It seems to be not pharmacologically significant. And so overall, instead of increasing dopamine, what rhodiola appears to be doing is increasing serotonin and reducing catecholamines and reducing cortisol in general. So overall, the reason why it probably suppresses appetite and why it's been shown to reduce stress-induced binge eating in female rats is because when you have an increase in serotonin, you're going to have a decrease in appetite. And when you have a decrease in catecholamines, you'll have a decrease in appetite. Okay? Because one of the catecholamines is dopamine, and serotonin is directly an antagonist of dopamine. Dopamine is actually a molecule required for seeking food and rewards. So higher serotonin means less dopamine. Less dopamine means less seeking, which means less craving for food and addictive behaviors in general. So the thing is, again, there is a Bell response curve. And the reason why is because of its seemingly serotonin increasing and catecholamine reducing effects. The less dopamine you have, the more lazy you're going to be. The more serotonin you have, the more lazy you're going to be. And for me, and this is actually why I wanted to make this video, is because, first of all, I recognize that there's no clear, we don't know for sure what active constituents are actually contributing to rhodiola's benefits. And so I took a whole herb concentrate because it's not standardized for specific isolated individual constituents like rosavins or salidisarides, because we don't know what's causing the effect, and there's good evidence that it's a multitude of different compounds found in rhodiola. But the thing is, for me, I felt more of the serotonin increasing effects to the point where I felt so tired I couldn't even get up in the morning. I would take rhodiola, and it's a 300 milligram concentrate. So it was a 6-to-1 concentrate. It was the equivalent of about 2,000 to 3,000 milligrams of whole herb extract. But since it's not standardized, that would more than likely provide me with less of the active constituents than in most commonly taken extracts in these studies. But it seemed to be too much, because I seemed to be taken enough to actually cause fatigue, where I felt so tired I wanted to just fall asleep, right? And I didn't have any motivation to do jiu-jitsu or get to the gym. In fact, when I did, I felt like I just wanted to go home. Now, most people who take the right dose, they experience greater social interaction, reduced anxiety, especially social anxiety, greater ability to, deal with stressful situations, and overall reduce in anxiety and stress, as demonstrated by most clinical studies. Although it is imperative to mention that in some studies there's actually an increase in fatigue and tiredness. And there's actually some studies that also show a decrease in subjective well-being. Although the general consensus is that rhodiola decreases fatigue and increases feelings of well-being, and is a reliable antidepressant, which is even more powerful than St. John's worts or pharmaceutical antidepressants. So again, rhodiola has been shown to have a bell curve response, and it's recommended to not exceed the 680 milligram dosage as a higher dose. The decrease in fatigue appears to be fairly strong and quite reliable when a low dose is given over a prolonged period of time, or a high dose is given acutely. There are studies that have found an increase in fatigue, and one that found that it depended on the method of measuring fatigue. So it's possible that the results, while generally positive, will be variable, and higher dosages may be ineffective. So from the overall evidence, what I've been seeing is, rhodiola has been useful as a daily preventative against fatigue, reported in studies to be effective in even doses as low as 50 milligrams. And my experience says a lower dose is going to be the best as far as preventing fatigue. Now, if I took I've actually taken 4 rhodiolas, but they're whole herb concentrates, not standardized. That put me completely to sleep and gave me the best sleep of my life. So the dose makes the poison here. And what I was going to say earlier is that if you're going to take rhodiola, you're probably going to, so you need to understand, like, rosavins and solidisaccharides, the active constituents vary, okay? And we don't know what is actually causing benefits. So you're going to have to experiment with, first of all, different dosages of rhodiola, starting with the smallest dose you can find. 50 milligrams is probably going to be the best place to start, and if you don't feel anything, increase it. Start to increase it slowly by 50 milligrams at a time. And the different extracts make a huge difference. The whole herb concentrate will give you a completely different result than one that is standardized for higher rosavins. And from the studies I'm seeing, it seems like the solidisaccharides are actually the compound with the most relevant significant effect, as you're going to see as I continue talking here. And so if you get an extract that has high rosavins but it's not standardized for the solidisaccharides, then you might be missing out on the actual active constituent that is giving its real effects. Because most rhodiola extracts actually are standardized for rosavins. But it seems like rosavins aren't even actually the compounds that make the significant active, effects. So experiment with different dosages of different types of standardized extracts. Okay, this is the thing, is like with herbs and with nutrition, and also even with pharmaceutical drugs, it is trial and error. I mean, I remember when I was, under the care of a psychiatrist when I was like, in my, childhood and then early teens, and they were trying me on different medications and stuff. It was still trial and error. No matter how scientific, no matter how much people think, oh, you need, scientific intervention trials, blah, 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 like, that's all valuable, but at the end of the day, even with pharmaceutical drugs of all kinds, it's still trial and error. Like, so it's funny, people, like, they criticize people for seeking other people's experiences on the internet, when, like, even in clinical practice, it's still trial and error. So people's experiences matter more than clinical trials demonstrating, Anyway, so rosavins. Rosavins is a cinnamol alcohol glycosideride found in the plant Rhodiola Rosea. It is thought to be one of the compounds responsible for the antidepressant and anti-anxiety actions. Rosavins do not have influence on any of the fraction of monoamine oxidase, which is a compound responsible for breaking down neurotransmitters in the periphery, as I mentioned earlier. Salidrosides, on the other hand, to a certain extent, 36% of the value of salidrosides inhibit the activity of monoamine oxidase B, which may be reflected in higher concentration of dopamine and energizing effect. Interestingly, there are also other ingredients with MAOI inhibiting effects inside of rhodiola, besides salidrosides, which are quite powerful. Rosiridin is in this aspect the most interesting, as it inhibits monoamine oxidase A, with the effectiveness of 16% of the reference drug and as much as 84% monoamine oxidase B, which is a really impressive score. Unfortunately, we won't find standardization for rosiridin in any supplement, so we may only hope for its presence. So now, at the time of the paper, at the time that the reference I'm talking about, at the time that it was written, there wasn't any supplements that standardized for rosiridin, but I believe in recent years, but I'm not exactly sure. I know that there's a couple of supplements that I've seen that standardize rosiridin. I believe Gaia Herbs has a liquid extract. Actually, it's a liquid gel extract that is standardized for rosiridin. And I believe Natural Factors? I believe that there are. So you're just going to have to look. At the time of the paper, though, it wasn't very well known that rosiridin had, highly significant relevant effects. And there's a lot of people, like I mentioned earlier in the paper, that believe there's a lot of evidence that rhodiola in general, regardless of its standardization, seems to not have significant monoamine oxidase inhibiting effects, whether on enzyme B or A, in humans. Although, there's evidence that maybe it just depends on what active constituents are actually standardized for. And this is very important when we're talking about herbs, and it is the reason why I took a whole herb extract instead of a standardized extract. Because, look, there's thousands of compounds in all plants, and we only know of a couple dozen, right, of vitamins or minerals or polyphenolic compounds. And depending on the composition of these different compounds within whatever extract or plant that we're taking, it's going to have different effects. And it seems that these compounds work synergistically, not independent of one another, which is why you see side effects typically on pharmaceutical drugs. It's because plants are not meant to be isolated and extracted, right? And this is one of the reasons why I kind of stopped talking about the science of different herbs and things, is because we're thinking about it in a reductionist, westernized way that doesn't seem to serve too much benefit. But if we're going to take a standardized extract, it's important to know Rosea seems to have the most strongest effects on increasing dopamine, specifically by inhibiting its breakdown, by inhibiting the monoamine oxidase A and B enzymes. Okay, that's important, because typically you'll find MAOI inhibiting on the B enzyme, but without the A, and vice versa. But this one actually seems to inhibit both. So now we have salid roside. Salid roside is a glucoside of tyrosol found in rhodiola. The molecular mechanism of action of solidiceride is heavily debated, and it's not 100% known in human studies. However, it is proposed that solidiceride targets the Krebs transcription factor for the development and survival of new neurons in the dentate gyrus of old mice. A number of studies have revealed that solidiceride exhibits neuroprotective activities, including anti-Alzheimer's effects, anti-Parkinson's disease, anti-Huntington's disease, anti-stroke, antidepressant effects, and anti-traumatic brain injury effects. It is also useful for improving cognitive function, treating addiction, keeping that in mind, treating addiction, probably because it increases serotonin, right? And preventing epilepsy, okay, probably because it seems to also inhibit glutamate, because glutamate is the firing of neurons. Glutamate is a neurotransmitter that increases the excitation of neurons. And typically, anything that offsets glutamate also offsets catecholamines, because catecholamines tend to come in a cluster with glutamate, and GABA tends to come in a cluster with things like serotonin. Okay, because we're talking about things that increase activity in the brain and things that hinder activity in the brain. And so glutamate, it excites the brain. Dopamine excites the brain. Cortisol excites the brain, and rhodiola stops all of the excitation. And the excitation of neurons, including increasing glutamate and all these things, tend to play a huge role in epilepsy, which is why things that increase GABA, such as theanine, green tea, GABA, or a state of ketosis, however you want to induce it, seems to also be protective against epilepsy. It all has to do with their effects on glutamate, hindering or increasing, right? Fun fact, I think caffeine's main effects on, its main pharmacological effects responsible for increasing concentration is through increasing glutamate and catecholamines in general, and not just its effects on adenosine. So anyway, the mechanisms underlying the potential protective effects of solidiceride involvement are the regulation of oxidative stress response, inflammation, apoptosis, hypothalamus, pituitary adrenal axis, the HPA axis, neurotransmission, neural regeneration, and the cholinogenic system, so acting on choline and acetylcholine. Among the mechanisms most affected by the influence of rhodiola, we may assume signalization of receptors coupled with G proteins, the activity of glutamate receptors, and the activity of ephedrine receptors and the pathways in which CAMP takes part. Moving to practical effects, this results in decreasing the tendency of the aggressive behaviors and alleviating over-emotionality, which confirms the results of the previous clinical and preclinical trials testing the influence of rhodiola on depression and anxiety disorders. So overall, there's a lot of conflicting molecular mechanistic studies going on here, or mechanisms of action. There's a lot of conflicting evidence going on here. If you notice, one minute I'm saying, oh, it seems like it doesn't inhibit monooxidase B. Another, it seems like it does inhibit MAOI. And then conversely, you know, we have some studies showing like, oh, it's rosavins. Oh no, it's salicylserides. Or oh, it increases dopamine. Oh no, it increases serotonin. Or oh, it increases, it decreases fatigue. Oh no, it might increase fatigue at certain dosages. This is why nutrition science and health science in general is so complicated, okay? Is because, well, the evidence that's presented, it's, you know, if it is clinical trials and mechanistic data, which is a golden standard because we're actually measuring exactly what's going on in the body when we introduce certain compounds. The body is a very complex organism, and when you increase dopamine, it offsets 100 other different neurotransmitters and processes in the body. And within that, whatever it is, it's increasing dopamine, for example. There's hundreds of other molecules in the whole plant, because we don't usually ingest one vitamin or one mineral or one polyphenol or one compound. When we eat food or ingest herbs, without technology, of course, we're ingesting the whole plant, which is how it's meant to be and how humans have actually consumed these plants for so long. And so when we learn about one compound and what it does in the body, it has no benefit on consuming the whole herb, right? And so when you're trying to understand standardized extracts or pharmaceutical drugs, or trying to understand vitamins and minerals, the evidence that you're reading only applies in the context in which it was studied. So if it's a study done on rosavin, okay, that only applies to rosavin. It doesn't apply to rhodiola as a whole. And that's a very hard thing for people to accept, because they want to know what it does, exactly what it does in every molecular mechanism. Unfortunately, that's just not possible. You're not going to really experience, like, you're only going to hinder your understanding of herbs and nutrition and vitamins and minerals if you are focusing entirely on this molecular rabbit hole, right? This is how we get farther and farther away of the causes of things like heart disease, and why all these things are so debated. It's because we're looking at the wrong sources of evidence, right? So anyway, I'm going to offer you guys some practical suggestions with how to go about this. So again, the main reason why I got into all of this is because, you know, I've been taking rhodiola, different extracts, I mean, all different herbs, right? But rhodiola on and off for like 6 years now, has it been? Yeah, it's been more than 6 years. And I've taken different extracts, and in particular, I tend to notice when I start to take too much, it puts me to sleep. But if I take just the right amount, it increases euphoria, okay? And so what you're going to have to do is, you know, and another thing is not, like, I've already talked about all the nuances and complexity of the herb and all the different molecules in the herb, and then when you take one molecule or one herb, it influences hundreds of thousands of different processes in your body. And then also, whoever it is taking the herb has hundreds of thousands of different metabolic processes going on. And so all of these things should affect different people differently. So it's very hard to really know based on science how this is going to affect you exactly. But we can have an idea it's going to do one of two things. Either it's going to increase fatigue or it's going to decrease fatigue, okay? And so the dosage and the type of extract you take is going to be the determining factor in how it affects you. This is going to be trial and error. Start with a very small dose of rhodiola. Start off with, I think, was it the... start off with a very basic extract. I think something that's standardized to like 3% solidisarides and 1% rosavins. Try to see if you can find one that also is standardized for, was it roseridins and tyrosol? Because I've seen some that are, and they're alcoholic extracts. And see if you can find one that has a standardized extract of all of these compounds, but higher solidisarides. Take tiny dosages at first. And after a week, slowly start bumping it up. And then if you start to feel negative effects, bump it back down and try the small dose over time to see what happens. Because the other thing is, reducing cortisol over time can have a cumulative effect. And adaptogenic herbs are supposed to adapt to the organism. They're not supposed to be taken as a pharmaceutical. The other thing is, the slow, tiny dosages over time is how they've traditionally been taken. And that might be why we have the conflicting evidence as well. So small doses taken over time. Experiment with the most successful extracts you see other people using in Reddit forums and Launch City and some of these other forums with all these big data, big forums of people's experiences, and maybe try a tincture extract. Like for me, I think the Herb Farm tincture is the only one they sell now. The capsules were very powerful. It's a whole herb concentrate, so you're not standardizing for any one compound. And since it's a tincture, you can take just a drop a day. And since there's about 30 drops per tincture, you take that for months, and it'll last you forever. And you might not notice much of an effect at first, but after about a month, you might start to notice, whoa, I just feel better, more vigorous, and just a little bit of a boost, right? So anyway, if you're looking for direct nootropic benefits, there's a lot better herbs that you can take that you'll notice real quickly, like high-dose fish oil, magnesium, theanine, caffeine stack, the basics. Acetyl-L-carnitine seems to work well. And just eating an overall brain-boosting diet is going to be much more effective than, yo-yoing around with things like rhodiola. And for me, actually set me back and started making me, disassociate myself from the world. And, I started to get all sorts of really bad high serotonin effects. So, sentimental, depression, lack of motivation, starting to have extreme existential thoughts to the point of where the detriment of my life, really, started to impact my life in a negative way. Anyway, leave your questions and comments down below, your opinions and your experiences with rhodiola, and what did you get out of this whole thing? Because I don't know how many people are going to benefit from this deep science, but that's something that I tend to talk about so much. Leave your questions and comments down below. Let me know. Talk to you guys next time.